Hello, everyone, and welcome back to part 3 of my Gucci series. I'm Wally, for those that may not know me, and I make videos about fashion designers and fashion houses. So if you're interested in fashion or you want to know more about certain designers, houses, and their work, this is definitely the place for you, so welcome. I'm very excited to be back today. It's all very exciting. I know in the last video, I stressed myself out quite a bit, and this video will probably be no different, so welcome to the story that is my life. But what we are going to be talking about today is pretty heavy. It's intense. We have a lot to talk about, and I want to really just get into it so that we have enough time to talk about it. However, I do also want to give a brief overview on what we talked about at the end of part 2, where we briefly inferred that Investcorp would be going into battle against Maurizio Gucci for control of the company, which only happened because Maurizio Gucci thought he had more power than he actually did. See, Investcorp, the investment company that helped Maurizio buy out his family's 50% stake in the company, had remained a silent partner within Gucci for many years. They blindly and quite naively trusted Maurizio Gucci to run Gucci. That is until Aldo Gucci died, and Maurizio, in this moment of clarity, decided that he wanted to buy out Investcorp's 50% stake to return Gucci to a single holding company run by the Gucci family. Basically, he wanted complete and total control of the company, even though he was pretty much running it by himself already. But whatever. Maurizio went to Investcorp with his idea and they agreed to help him. They even agreed to go through the company's financials and figure out where Gucci stood financially as to help Maurizio secure proper financing. But it was during their investigation that Investcorp realized Gucci was in serious trouble, just a terrible state. From their research, they knew that no one would finance Maurizio, and no one did. So after this, Investcorp realized they had no choice but to start using their voting power. They realized they needed to safeguard their investment into Gucci, and they did so by enforcing a set of rules upon Maurizio on how to govern Gucci. And one of their new contingencies was that Maurizio Gucci wasn't allowed to put up all or part of his 50% stake in Gucci as collateral for financing, meaning he couldn't, in writing or verbally, offer up any of his 50% stake in exchange for a deal or money that he desperately needed to pay off his debt and keep control of the company. But Investcorp wasn't done. Their research found that sales had fallen 20% and tens of millions of dollars had just vanished. So they dug deeper to find out why Gucci was bleeding money. And it was through their investigation that Investcorp discovered that when Maurizio had dismantled the GAC, or the Gucci Accessories Collection, he actually took products off the shelves and didn't allow his creative teams, Tom Ford and Don Mello, enough time to replenish them with new inventory. So there was this period of like 3 to 4 months where Gucci stores were completely empty. And when the GAC, which was run under Gucci America, was dismantled, Domenico Desolé, who was CEO of Gucci America, had to take out a $25 million loan through Citibank in order to keep the company alive. And Domenico Desolé had actually gone to Investcorp many times before their investigation to warn them about what Maurizio Gucci was doing. He pleaded with them to help because he knew that Maurizio was running Gucci into the ground, but they ignored his pleas, and as a result, Gucci America suffered.
Things were done in a somewhat irrational way. I think that incurred massive costs in Italy, which the company could not afford at the time. For instance, he decided we had to clean an all new product. Okay, well, that's a great idea, but what's the cost of it? So overnight he said, no more GG. So I said, well, Maurizio, GG is like 70% of the sales, but he wanted to do it at all costs. So the company really went to, tailspin and started really losing money and was very, very difficult. Became very painful.
Domenico Desolé couldn't pay for merchandise, meet payroll, and other basic operating expenses, which is why he had to take out the $25 million loan. But now Citibank was also asking Gucci America for repayment on that loan, and Investcorp finally intervened. They showed Citibank what they had discovered in their investigation, which showed that given time, Gucci America would bounce back. So Citibank agreed to hold off repayment on the loan until Gucci America had time to recover. But Citibank's agreement was contingent on Domenico Desolé remaining CEO of Gucci America. Unfortunately, this move by Citibank only deepened Maurizio's mistrust in Gucci America, Investcorp, and Domenico Desolé, because he believed they were all out to ruin him. He hated how everyone questioned him, and because of that, he trusted none of them. He was in a very bad place both within the company and outside of it, because he also had personal debts to settle as well. So in order to get what he wanted and prove that he was in control, he tried to restart the GAC, or the Gucci Accessories Collection, the same company he had only just dismantled. But restarting the GAC didn't do what he wanted it to do. It brought in a few million, but nothing like it had before. And because of this, Maurizio began blaming everyone else for his misfortunes. And when the press caught wind of what was happening at Gucci, Maurizio accused Don Mello outright of leaking information to the press. So in retaliation, he faxed Domenico Desolé requesting that he fire Don Mello, Tom Ford, and all other designers being paid under Gucci America. He was in an absolute spiral. His anger was obviously misplaced because all of his problems were finally catching up to him. Maurizio's debt was catching up to him. Citibank was requesting repayment of his own personal loans, so they went to Swiss authorities to try and sequester his assets, which included his house in St. Moritz. And that was when Swiss authorities discovered that Maurizio Gucci hadn't been paying his mortgage payments on the property, so they took both his house and his 50% stake in Gucci as collateral. Swiss authorities informed Maurizio that if he failed to pay back his loans by May of 1993, his assets, which included his stake in Gucci, would be auctioned off. Now, obviously, Investcorp was informed of this, and they actually went to Maurizio and offered him a deal. They would give him the 40 million he needed, plus an additional 10 million for 5% of his 50% stake in Gucci, which would make the partnership 55-45. They even said that they would hire a competent CEO to run the company, but keep Maurizio on as honorary chairman.
I told him that it was in his best interest, in order to keep and preserve the good relationship he had had with Investcorp, to go to Investcorp and say, let's choose a common new chief executive officer, somebody who's really going to operate the business. And so when I told him that, unfortunately, the reaction was extremely negative, because for him, I was telling him, which is the truth, that he was not capable to run the company. And I felt the responsibility of telling him that in his own interest, but sometimes, your own interest is perceived in a different way.
Which in my opinion is karma, because what Investcorp was offering him was exactly what he offered and gave to Aldo Gucci as he removed him from his own company. And just like Aldo Gucci, Maurizio was so insulted by this offer that he refused to be a guest in his own house. Well, I guess it's more accurate to say his family's house, but nevertheless, he refused their deal. He walked off determined to find another way out. That is when he made a deal with a man by the name of Zorzi, who agreed to give him the 40 million he needed, but in return, Zorzi would be given exclusive distribution rights with Gucci in the Far East. And as collateral on the agreement, Maurizio wrote Zorzi a letter putting up his 50% stake in Gucci. But remember, he couldn't legally do this. He knew it was a direct violation of his binding agreement with Investcorp. And he didn't seem to care. He went back to Investcorp and told them that he had found the money he needed and everything was going to be okay. Now, naturally, Investcorp was confused. They wanted to know how a man who was dead broke somehow managed to find $40 million. So they pressed him, and he spun this insane story about his late father, Rodolfo. He explained to them how Rodolfo had come to him in a dream and told him to check under the floorboards of the house. He exclaimed to them, and my father came to me in this dream, and he said, Maurizio, you bischero, the solution to all your problems is in the parlor. Just look over there by the window. One of the floorboards is loose. Pull it up, and underneath you will see. So when I woke up, I got up and looked under the loose board, and it was incredible. There was more money than I could possibly ever know what to do with there, under the floor. So I didn't want to be greedy. I took just enough to pay off my shares. Which is just absolutely ridiculous because this dude was dead broke. Why wouldn't he take all the money? And I don't know rich people, but how does one person keep $40+ million under a floorboard? It was just an outright lie and an absolute slap in the face to Investcorp. This story made it very clear to them that Maurizio Gucci didn't respect them. All of their goodwill, and there had been a lot of it, was spent up. They now knew that in order to safeguard their investment into Gucci, they would have to go to war with Maurizio over the house of Gucci. The battle was going to be ugly, and they knew that they were going to have to risk everything because Maurizio Gucci was going to do everything in his power, even if it meant pushing Gucci into its grave to win. Because if he was going down, he was absolutely without a doubt willing to take everything and everyone down with him. And this battle between Investcorp and Maurizio is a long one. It's also quite confusing. There's a lot of suing and countersuing. So what we're going to talk about today is a summary of that battle. So after Maurizio told Investcorp this ridiculous story, Investcorp's first move was to figure out where Maurizio had found $40 million, while Maurizio actually fired the first shot. He claimed Gucci America owed Gucci, their parent company, and the company he controlled $63.9 million. And so he sued them. And it should be noted that this debt of $63.9 million had nothing to do with the $40 million loan that Gucci America had with Citibank. This was a debt that Gucci America had supposedly accrued and now owed Gucci. And it does sound confusing because why would anyone sue their own company? But under Italian law, executives can do what they deem necessary in order to protect the interest of their company, which meant that Maurizio Gucci could rightfully sue Gucci America in the interest of Gucci. Investcorp, however, saw this move as Maurizio's way of depleting Gucci America, because if Gucci America couldn't pay back Gucci, and they really couldn't, Maurizio could make a claim for Gucci America's assets, which included the Fifth Avenue offices and the coveted Gucci trademark. However, trying to play it cool and gather more information, Investcorp decided not to fight back. Instead, they let Maurizio sue Gucci America because they knew it would spur an investigation, which would give them more information why Gucci America owed Gucci so much money. Investcorp knew Maurizio was responsible for whatever debt Gucci America had accrued. They just didn't know how, because Maurizio hid a lot from them. And naturally, they were right. The investigation had proved that Gucci America's debt to Gucci wasn't actually legitimate, but an attempt by Maurizio Gucci to keep the parent company Gucci alive. The investigation also gave Investcorp the information they needed. They discovered that Maurizio had gotten his $40 million from Zorzi, and did so as a direct violation of their agreement by putting his Gucci shares up as collateral. So Investcorp got Maurizio's deal with Zorzi declared null and void. They also filed a suit against him, charging him with violation of their contracts and mismanaging the company. During court proceedings, Investcorp tried to force Maurizio to step down, using the story of his late father's ghost, telling him to look under the floorboards as evidence of his incompetency. Back and forth they fought, suing and countersuing each other until September of 1993, when Gucci's supervisory board notified both parties that because they had been unable to resolve their differences and settle their debts, the company and all of its assets would be put up for auction. This was it. There were no more lifelines. Maurizio Gucci was facing personal bankruptcy as well as company bankruptcy, and knowing they had the upper hand, Investcorp went to Maurizio with one final offer. And he accepted. On September 23, 1993, Maurizio Gucci had signed away his 50% stake in Gucci to Investcorp for $120 million. He was the last Gucci to retain power of the house, and for the first time since its creation, Gucci would be run by a third party. And for now, it seems the second biggest battle for Gucci was over, but there will be one final fight for control that we are probably going to discuss more in the final video. So Maurizio Gucci was out, and it's kind of sad because he really did have good intentions, but he lacked skill.
He had the right instincts. I think that the problem, he couldn't make it happen. There's some people have great vision, but he had the greatest vision, the great strategy. But if you don't execute, he was incapable, really beyond incapable of executing. That's really was the bottom line.
He had inherited a path already set out for him, and had spent his life being groomed for a role that I'm not even sure he wanted. In the months after leaving Gucci behind, Maurizio lived in a daze. Losing Gucci caused him so much anguish, and he felt he had disappointed everyone. And I'm sure all those sons blamed him, just like they had blamed him for everything else. And he knew that. So in a midlife career crisis, Maurizio Gucci bought a motorbike and he took off. He spent time on his yacht and traveling. He spent time reconciling with his loss and found ways to forgive himself. But I don't think he ever let go of the shame he felt for betraying everyone and losing the business his family had founded. But eventually he would move on. He began to see this as a new opportunity. He could do what he wanted, and for the first time in his life, he could decide his future. No one would tell him what to do. No one was expecting anything from him. He could recreate Maurizio Gucci and do what he wanted for the rest of his life. And we will come back to Maurizio, because his story is far from over. But I do want to talk about what happened at Gucci after Maurizio left. Upon his departure, Investcorp worked quickly. They transferred $15 million to pay off their most urgent accounts, and an additional $50 million to get Gucci up and running again. They hired an HR director to repair the workers' broken trust, streamline operations, and cut costs. Then they focused their attention on the future of Gucci. They could go in the direction Maurizio had always advocated for, which was class, la dolce vita, Hollywood, glamour, and handbags. Or they could go in a more fashion-oriented direction that Domenico Desolé was advocating for. In the end, everyone ultimately agreed it was worth the risk to go in a trendier direction. But by May 1994, Dawn Mello had resigned as creative director of Gucci, and so now Investcorp would need to fill her role as well. To replace her, they wanted to hire someone like Gianfranco Ferré, but they didn't have the money. And even worse, no designer of any fame was gonna want to work at Gucci with the state it was in. Taking a job there would ruin their reputation. So Investcorp had no idea what to do. But just before leaving, Don Mello had actually put Tom Ford's name into the mix. Yes, he was still relatively young for the fashion industry, but he had an impressive work ethic and skill, and he had proved to Don Mello that he was more than capable of handling the job. However, as I had also mentioned in part 2, and just like Don Mello, Tom Ford was thinking of leaving Gucci behind. For years, he had designed according to what Don Mello and Maurizio Gucci had wanted, and after the chaos of the last few years, Tom Ford had decided that he didn't want to be under anyone's supervision anymore. Plus, all of his friends were begging him to leave before Gucci ruined him, and he almost did. That is until Investcorp decided they could use him. They asked him to stay. They offered him free reign to take the risk and create whatever he wanted. And Tom Ford knew that his reputation was already hurt by having worked at Gucci, and it would be extremely difficult for him to find a job anywhere. So he took their offer. And I think he realized it was worth a shot. He was literally being given free reign to create his wildest dreams. Gucci was already in the grave, dirt was being shoveled on top. So honestly, what was the worst that could happen? Nothing. That same year, Gucci appointed Tom Ford creative director and Domenico Desolé COO of Gucci.
After Maurizio left, they started giving me more and more responsibility. And I became the chief operating officer of the company very quickly. And at that point, I really, de facto, was running the company. They basically asked me who I thought that to be the creative director. And I felt very strongly to be Tom. I remember very vividly, I drove up to Milan and Tom was very, very young. We had a meeting and I said, Tom, I think we can really fix this company. So I said, look, I'm not interested in interfering. I'm a businessman. I don't pretend to be a creative person by any means. So you're in charge, you do it and let's see where we go here. He accepted, and that's really the beginning of the story.
The company was moving forward, and their plan was to move forward without compromising tradition and craftsmanship. Workers still rolled layers of leather over wooden forms and placed newspaper between the layers to pad them. They had kept to tradition, determined to see Gucci live on. And by this point, it seemed like things were starting to settle down a bit. I mean, things were still very bad, but there was a light at the end of the tunnel, so Investcorp decided that it was time for them to look for a buyer. They wanted to sell Gucci to recoup their money, but they were looking for no less than 500 million. And with the state Gucci was in, no one was willing to spend that kind of money. The offers they had received were far too low, so they let go of that idea and held on to Gucci. And though it was completely unintentional on their part, it was a smart move to hold on to Gucci because by early 1995, Japanese consumers had started to turn their attention back to Gucci. So much so that Gucci began having a hard time keeping products on the shelves. Tom Ford had worked quickly and efficiently to put his own twist on Gucci classics, like turning the bamboo bag into a backpack, which became an absolute success, to the point that stores were sending in stock orders by the thousands. And to really sort of put it into perspective, the mini bamboo babes were being produced at a rate of 25,000 a week. There were, at this point in time, I think 64 retail stores. So even if each store only requested 1,000 bags, that was a minimum of 64,000 bags at any given time. Gucci was underproducing by a lot. The demand was nice, but Gucci wasn't fast fashion. Employees still made bags by hand. They fired bamboo handles over an open flame and shaped them by hand. At one point, they ran their bamboo suppliers dry and had to seek out other suppliers. The workers were working so fast that handles actually sprang back up because they hadn't been fired long enough and had to be sent back to be fixed. It is very hard to be commercial when craftsmanship and durability are paramount. Even though demand was high and the wait lists were long, Gucci lovers stayed. Tom Ford proved himself to be the ultimate commercial designer because almost everything he created had impressively long wait lists. He knew how to keep a few hot and trendy things running. With every season, he would come up with 2 great bags and 2 pairs of heels, and he would make them the star, quickly developing a widely popular world traveler wardrobe. He found inspiration from movies and rewatched them to immerse himself in whatever mood he was in. His team began drawing up sketches and posing questions like, who is the girl wearing this outfit? What does she do? Where is she going? What does her house look like? What car does she drive? This approach allowed him to create an entire storyline around every collection. And the first collection he ever released was actually menswear in 1995 at the PT Uomo Trade Fair. It was said to be very similar to the clothes that the men wore at his women's wear show only a few weeks later. Muscular men in skin-tight, bright-colored velvet suits with metallic patent leather moccasins that sparkled under the spotlights. So only a few weeks later, in March 1995, his women's wear collection had the press buzzing. Everyone wondered what Tom Ford would do next, and the results were pretty shocking. The show opened to Amber Valletta in a lime green satin shirt unbuttoned to her navel, paired with low-slung blue velvet pants, a lime green mohair coat, and cranberry patent leather boots. Shalom Harlow wore the same blue pants with a blue silk top, deeply unbuttoned, and a matching blue mohair coat. The collection was full of sleek and sexy curve-hugging satin suits. Every single model looked like they had stepped off a private jet. Their wet-lipped looks, velvet hip huggers, satin shirts, and mohair jackets were soon on the cover of every magazine around the world. It was hot, it was sex, was the press's description of the show. The effortless sexuality drove the audience and the world crazy with its blatant audacity.
This was the first collection that I had complete creative control over. I had been at Gucci already at that time for about 4 years. It had been in my contract that I was not allowed to step out onto the runway. Maurizio Gucci really felt that he wanted the brand to be the important thing and not the fashion designer. So I had this moment where I was there and I could design whatever I wanted because no one was looking over my shoulder. And I was very proud of what I did, and I stepped out on the runway.
Many began claiming Tom Ford was the next Karl Lagerfeld, which is a reference to the man who revived Chanel. Because Tom Ford stepped into his showroom the day after that show, and it was complete hysteria. Celebrities began wearing his clothes everywhere. Elizabeth Hurley in patent leather boots and a faux fur jacket. Madonna in a blue satin blouse and low-sung velvet pants. Gucci was it. And we will continue to talk about Tom Ford's Gucci era saga, but I want to go back a bit and finish off Maurizio Gucci's story. I am under the assumption that many people have watched the House of Gucci movie. I did finally watch it just recently, and I don't think it gave a good idea of what actually happened. I know the family story quite well, and I was still very confused watching it, but I am going to be discussing Maurizio Gucci's fate today. Basically, I want to finish off his story the right way, and I have gone back and forth on if I should even speak on this. I still don't know. I am not a true crime person. I feel very uncomfortable and out of my depth right now, but I'm going to try my best. So we do have to go back a little bit to 1990 when Maurizio Gucci started dating Paola Franchi. At that point in time in 1990, Maurizio and Patrizia Reggiani had been separated for about 5 years. And during that time, Patrizia Reggiani went into a downward spiral. Maurizio and many others were said to be worried for her. But those that were worried for her were also worried that Patrizia would try to hurt Maurizio because she was getting really into voodoo and darker magics. So once Maurizio started dating Paola Franchi in 1990, Patrizia only got worse. She began secretly spying on him to the point that Maurizio had to start taking taxis because he had discovered that some of his drivers were reporting his movements to Patrizia. She even kept in constant communication with people living in his Milan duplex, who would inform her when Paola was over and if she stayed the night. Through Maurizio's personal chef, she found out that he was doing renovations on his house and his yacht, and that he had bought a Ferrari and a private plane. And when Maurizio was still battling with Investcorp, some Gucci employees would inform her on what was happening. She became obsessed. And as Maurizio's relationship with Paola Franchi intensified, the more distance he put between himself and Patrizia, which made her crazy. She hated that Paola stayed in her house and even threatened to burn it down, going as far as to ask a housekeeper to prepare 2 tanks of gasoline and to leave them on the side of the house, and she would do the rest. Thankfully, no one helped her, but that didn't stop her from trying. She tried to have him and his house cursed through rituals and seances. She was overstepping boundaries, but she didn't see it as a problem. She felt everything belonged to her, that she was somehow owed more.
When I met her, I thought she must be a little mad, because her hatred for her husband was so excessive and so transparent, it was terrifying. She so obviously wanted to control her husband's money and his inheritance.
Patrizia still felt that she was Mrs. Gucci. She was introducing herself as Mrs. Gucci.
And her misplaced anger and rage only intensified in fall 1991 when Maurizio had asked her for a divorce, which became official in May 1992. And I really think this was her catalyst. I feel Patrizia saw this as Maurizio opening himself back up to the possibility of marriage, especially to someone that wasn't her.
Patrizia Reggiani poi avversava una relazione sentimentale che Maurizio Gucci aveva in quegli ultimi tempi con la Paola Franchi e probabilmente temeva che, per esempio, Maurizio Gucci potesse fare un figlio con questa signora.
Quando ho saputo che Maurizio avrebbe voluto sposarsi con questa persona, che tra l'altro era una mia amica, ai tempi, ho detto non è possibile.
I also think she thought Maurizio did this to hurt her because he stripped her of her most prized possession, the last name Gucci. Because after this, her obsession became all consuming. Gucci was hers, and in her eyes, no one could wear the name. From here on, Maurizio Gucci became the source of all her pain and suffering. She vowed to destroy him, to have him come crawling back to her on his knees. Because also around the same time in spring 1992, Patrizia began suffering debilitating headaches. Doctors thought it was a malignant brain tumor, but it ended up being benign. She told anyone who would listen that Maurizio was the cause of the tumor, from all the stress he had caused her. Despite this, though, she did expect him to show up for her surgery, and he was going to, but both her mother and doctor requested that he not be present, because they feared his presence would upset her more and cause complications with her surgery. If he went, if he didn't, no matter how it played out, she was going to blame him. In her diary, she wrote, "Basta. It is impossible that a person like Maurizio Gucci can live his life among yachts, private planes, luxury apartments, and Ferraris without being judged as a low-base human. But here I am, along with 2 daughters, and a delinquent husband who has abandoned us because his continuous failures made him realize that what is left of his assets suffice only for him." For her, it was all about the money. She began using her benign brain tumor to her benefit, saying she was unfit to sign her earlier divorce papers, so they renegotiated for more money, a penthouse with a deed signed to his daughters, and an apartment for her mother. And again, she wrote in her diary, "Vendetta. Get your revenge because you are right. Be uncompromising because you have been offended. Superiority doesn't mean letting it all go, but finding out the best way to humiliate him and free yourself." And as soon as she was fit to talk to the press, she went about trying to tarnish his name. Her anger ran so deep that she began sending him tapes like one that read, "Dear Maurizio, am I mistaken? Or did you lose your mother as a young boy? Naturally, you did not know what it meant to have a father either, especially seeing how easy it was to weasel out of your responsibility to your daughters and my mother the day of the operation, without which they gave me a month to live. I want to tell you that you are a monster that belongs on the front pages of all the papers, because I want everyone to know what you are really like. I will go on television. I will go to America. I will make them talk about you. Maurizio, I am not going to give you a minute of peace. Don't make up excuses saying they wouldn't let you come visit me. My little darlings risked losing their mother, and my mother risked losing her only daughter. You hoped. You tried to crush me, but you couldn't. Now I have looked death in the face. You drive around in a Ferrari, which you bought secretly because you had to appear to have no money, while here in the house the white couches have turned beige, the parquet has a hole in it, the carpeting needs to be replaced, and the walls need to be restored. You know that Pompeian stucco crumbles in time, but there is no money. Everything for the Signor Presidente, but what about us? Maurizio, you have reached the limit. Even your own daughters don't respect you and don't want to see you anymore to better forget the trauma. You are a painful appendage that we all want to forget. Maurizio, the inferno for you is yet to come." And the tapes were all like this, just angry repairless with her telling Maurizio what she needed done. Everything was superficial. Everything was about money. And it was her belief that she was entitled to more. The tapes angered Maurizio, who sent them to his lawyer, who actually started growing a little collection of them. His lawyer even advised him to hire a bodyguard, but Maurizio didn't want to live his life controlled by Patrizia's threats. And this would go on for years, until 1993, when Maurizio Gucci sold off his shares to Investcorp. Because when that happened, something in Patrizia snapped. For her, Gucci was everything. It was money, it was power, and it was identity. And this was the final blow for her. She didn't want him back. She wanted him dead. So while Patrizia plotted her revenge, Maurizio focused on his life. In early 1994, he started over. He wanted to start a business and he gave himself a year to develop a new investment project. By all accounts, Maurizio was growing up. He bought a new wardrobe. He threw out his boring CEO suits and he got more involved in his daughter's lives. For his daughter Alessandra's 18th birthday, he gave her money that she was free to use how she wished. He told her to save it, invest it, or use it to cover the cost of her birthday party. His father had always been hard on him about money, so he wanted to teach his daughters how to manage it. But the plan backfired because Patrizia took the money and used it for the two of them to get plastic surgery, so they could look their best at her party. Patrizia hoped Maurizio would notice her post surgery, but the joke really is on her because he didn't show up. I think he didn't want to cause a scene or a fight between the two of them, which is naturally probably what would have happened had he shown up at the party. And it has been documented that it was at this party, their daughter's 18th birthday party, mind you, that Patrizia approached her lawyer and asked him what could happen if I decide to teach Maurizio a lesson. This startled him a bit. They asked her what she meant by teach him a lesson, and she rephrased the question to say, what would happen to me if I got rid of him? The lawyer chalked up her craziness to anger, but this wasn't the end. Only a few months after the party, Patrizia called up her lawyer again, asking him the same question, and he actually refused to represent her anymore and reported the conversation to Maurizio's lawyer.
Io andavo in giro a chiedere al salumaio, eccetera, così, ma c'è qualcuno di voi che ha il coraggio di ammazzare mio marito o no?
Asciutto, io frequentavo anche un certo ambiente. Io sapevo che in quell'ambiente Patrizia diceva quanto prendo se uccido mio marito.
And after Patrizia and Maurizio's divorce was finalized in November 1994, Maurizio required Patrizia to stop using the Gucci name. He even filed paperwork to seek custody of their two daughters. After getting out of his turbulent marriage and wiping his hands at Patrizia, Maurizio feared ever getting married again. However, he was still in a relationship with Paola, and he did ask his lawyers to draft up a relationship agreement for them that I am assuming would solidify their relationship business wise and financially. I'm not exactly sure. All I know is that it wasn't a binding life agreement. But by all accounts, Maurizio was turning his life around. He was free of Gucci, his father, and now Patrizia. This was supposed to be his second chance. And only a year or so later, on March 24th, 1995, while Tom Ford was being showered with praise for the success of his first Gucci show, Maurizio was taking his daughter Alessandra to take her driver's test. On March 25th, she called to inform him that she had passed the test. He told her that he was proud of her and that he would even take her on a trip to St. Moritz to celebrate. Sadly, however, this would be the last time that Alessandra ever talked to her father. Because just 2 days later, on March 27th, Maurizio woke up around 7 a.m., got dressed, and had breakfast with Paola, who was feeling a bit ill. Maurizio told her to go back to bed and that he would check in on her around lunchtime. He kissed her goodbye and walked the 100 steps from his home to his new office. Around 8:30 a.m., Giuseppe Onorato, a building maintenance worker, was sweeping leaves in the driveway of the building he worked for. He was a hyper-vigilant man who just that morning noticed a man standing across the street in front of a small green car. And by the time he had opened the gates to the building, two men were now standing in front of the car. They kept looking up and down Corso Venezia as if waiting for someone. And with his attention so focused on them, Giuseppe was only able to hear the faint and familiar buongiorno coming from Maurizio Gucci, who was already bounding up the stairs by the time Giuseppe had turned around. Within a few seconds, he watched Maurizio step into the foyer just as one of the two men from the street had stepped into the doorway and stopped at the foot of the stairs, where he quickly opened his coat, pulled out a gun, raised it to Maurizio's back, and fired. Giuseppe watched as the first bullet went through Maurizio's right hip, the second through his left shoulder, and then paralyzed and powerless in his place on Corso Venezia, Giuseppe watched Maurizio Gucci turn around in slow motion, puzzled, looking from the gunman to Giuseppe, as if to ask, what is happening? And just then the gunman fired a third bullet into Maurizio's right arm. With that, Maurizio slumped to the floor, moaning in pain as the gunman bounded up the stairs to where Maurizio Gucci lay, where he fired one final and fatal shot into Maurizio's right temple, killing him instantly. As the gunman turned to leave, he locked eyes with Giuseppe, and realizing he had left a witness, He raised his gun to Giuseppe and fired 2 bullets that thankfully landed in his arm. And then the gunman fled. Still in shock, Giuseppe turned to see Maurizio lying stretched out at the top of the stairs. He remembers trying to scream for help, but not being able to hear the sound of his own voice. For him, everything happened in slow motion, like a lifetime had passed. But in reality, it was only about 90 seconds. When the police arrived, they initially believed it was a mob hit, but the scene was too messy, and they had left a witness. Giuseppe was able to tell them that the gunman had used a makeshift silencer, which hadn't worked, and had manicured nails. The police interviewed everyone, and the name that left everyone's mouth was Patrizia Reggiani. Practically all of Milan knew Patrizia wanted him dead. She was telling anyone who would listen. And when she was informed about Maurizio's murder, she dated the page in her diary and wrote just one word, Paradisos, which is paradise in Greece, and she drew a bold black border around the date. It was as if she had finally found peace.
It was early in the morning. I received a telephone call that was telling me that Maurizio was shot. When I received the telephone call saying that Maurizio was shot, what I think was that I was very happy because all my problems were gone. And then I started to feeling very lost. Why? Because I didn't have any more to arguing.
By 3 p.m., only 6.5 hours after his murder, Patrizia went to Maurizio's house, banging on the door with her lawyer, and demanded entry to discuss legal matters. Since Paola and Maurizio weren't married and their binding agreement hadn't yet been finalized, Paola had no legal claim to anything. And just hours after Maurizio's murder, Patrizia was ordering Paola to leave, telling her, "I am here as a mother, not a wife. You must leave as soon as possible. This was Maurizio's home, and now it will be the house of his heirs. What exactly do you plan to take with you?" And the very next day, Patrizia came back with an eviction notice, and Paola was forced to pack up and leave. Even after she left, Patrizia did everything she could to get back things that Paola had taken with her, things that she had bought, things that were her own, that she had used to decorate the house with. Patrizia thought she had claim to them. On April 3rd, the Gucci family gathered for Maurizio's funeral, and as his coffin pulled up to the church, Patrizia stepped out of the limo as the perfect black widow. She played her part, but she never hid her true feelings, telling mourners, "On a human level, I'm sorry. On a personal level, I can't say the same thing. He may have died, but I've just begun to live."
She was interviewed on TV, and she said, some people die in their bed. Some people die on the street. Some people have the privilege to be killed. I mean, if she ain't crazy, I don't know who's crazy.
And I genuinely don't know how anyone didn't look into her sooner. I don't know how her daughters tolerated her, or stood by her side, or even forgave her. She is a vile leech, because she was literally telling this to people at his funeral. But that wasn't enough. To spite Maurizio Gucci one final time, she laid him to rest in St. Moritz, instead of with his father in Florence, which was one of his final wishes. And for 2 years, she lived the life of luxury, in pure abundance and happiness. But in early January 1997, there was a huge break in Maurizio Gucci's murder case. Only weeks into the new year, the Italian police were pulling up to Corso Venezia 38 with an arrest warrant for Patrizia Reggiani, charging her with Maurizio Gucci's murder. And she wasn't alone. 4 other people were charged as well. We have Patrizia's friend and confidant, Pino Ariema, a hotel porter, Ivano Savione, a restaurant manager, Orazio Cicala, and a mechanic by the name of Benedetto Cajaurlo.
I protagonisti dell'omicidio Gucci sembrano personaggi di un film della commedia italiana. Parte c'è Raulo Benedetto, killer. Lo ricordo come il personaggio più inquietante, anche come figura, come aspetto, sempre poche parole, molto duro anche nell'espressione.
And what a wild mix of fucking people. So I guess the question becomes, how did this unlikely group connect to Maurizio Gucci's murder? Here's where the story gets wild. It's going to sound made up, but trust me, this is very much real. So, buckle up. The lead investigator on the case had received a call from a man by the name of Gabriele Carpanese, who wanted to meet regarding the murder of Maurizio Gucci. Carpanese had recently moved back to Italy and was staying at a small hotel until he got settled. And it was at that hotel that Carpanese had befriended the hotel porter, Ivano Savioni, a small-time player in the local drug trade. And here's the thing. Gabriele Carpanese was dead broke from his move. So he tried to pull one over on Ivano Savioni, hoping to create an elaborate story that Savioni would be impressed by, so much so that Carpanese could stay at the hotel for free and save up some money. In his story, Carpanese told Savioni he was a very rich South American drug lord whose money was all tied up because of the FBI. Carpanese assured Savioni that once he got his money back, he would pay Savioni tenfold. Now, obviously, it sounds fake, but Savioni bought it. He was awestruck by Carpanese's story, and Savioni became eager to impress this South American drug lord. After boasting about some drug deals, Savioni told Carpanese about how he had lined up the killers for the murder of Maurizio Gucci. Carpanese, a liar himself, didn't initially believe Savioni, but over time, Savioni began to describe in detail the planning and execution. Then he informed Carpanese that the group was now planning to get even with Patrizia Reggiani, who they felt had improperly compensated them for their work. When Carpanese heard this news, he was in shock. He actually got scared because he felt his harmless lies had gotten him roped into a murder, and afraid of becoming an accomplice, Carpanese went to the police with what he knew. He told them how Patrizia Reggiani had paid $375,000, which is roughly around $650,000 today, for the execution of Maurizio Gucci. Pina Auriemma, Patrizia's friend, was the intermediary who had funneled the money and information between Patrizia and the men. Pina had brought in Savioni, the hotel porter, because she knew he needed money to pay off his debts. Savioni then brought in Orazio Cicala, the restaurant owner, to drive the getaway car, which was his son's green Renault Clio. And Orazio brought in Benedetto Cajarro, the former mechanic, who lived behind Orazio's restaurant. Benedetto was said to have obtained a 7.65 Beretta and had constructed a makeshift silencer out of tubing, bought bullets from Switzerland, and had destroyed the weapon after the murder. And it seems like this random group, with seemingly no connection, had gotten away with murder. So then the question remains, how did this murder for hire fall apart? The answer is money and power. Like I've been saying from the beginning, it's always about money and power, especially when we're talking about the Guccis. This wild mix of murderers and accomplices were led to believe that Maurizio's murder would change their lives, that Patrizia Reggiani would shower them in gold, but they were all still in immense debt and working lowly jobs. Their lives weren't changed, while Patrizia Reggiani was outliving her best life. She was reaping all the benefits of Maurizio's murder, and they wanted fair compensation. So they decided to get even. And that is why Savioni tried to get Gabriele Carpanese involved in their new plot to get back at Patrizia Reggiani. So after Carpanese told the police investigator everything that he knew, the investigator realized Carpanese was their best chance at infiltrating this wild group of people. The investigative team wanted Carpanese, the fake con, to wear a wire and gather information. So Carpanese went back to Savioni and told him he knew of a hitman by the name of Carlos who would help them get even with Patrizia. This hitman was actually an undercover detective, so Carpanese introduced Savioni to Carlos, the fake hitman, and then Savioni called Pina to let her know that he had found a solution to their problems. Soon after, Savioni brought Carlos, the fake hitman, to meet Pina, and he was able to plant a bug in her car, the same car that the group would regularly meet in to discuss their plans.
E nel momento in cui erano intercettati, loro parlavano di quello che avevano fatto.
And I know it might seem confusing as to why Patrizia's friend Pina would want to scare her or even attempt to murder her, but Pina Ariemi was also very unhappy with their arrangement. She had been the intermediary. She had coordinated the hit. She got the team together. She handled all the meetings in her car. And despite all of this, she hadn't been showered in gold either. That is why she agreed to their plan. However, she had one condition. They would only hire Carlos, the fake hitman, if they went to Patrizia to ask for what they were owed, and she refused. Within days, the police had more than enough recordings of everyone discussing the murder plot. Everyone except Patrizia, who they only referred to as La Signora. And even though she talked on the phone every day and night, she never discussed anything compromising as she was paranoid that people were listening to her.
Patrizia's having phone conversations with Pina, and they're talking about, how much money the killers need to be paid. They were also very clever, and so they were talking about how many meters of fabric they needed to buy. And so, the 10,000 or 30,000 or 40,000 lira was being talked about in terms of how many feet of stoffa for the new curtains.
And she was right. The police had bugged her phone. It's literally the only time her paranoia actually saved her. Now, originally, the police were going to hold off on the arrest until they could gather more intel, but on January 30th, the police overheard a conversation Patrizia had with her lawyer, where they told her seemingly out of nowhere, there are dark clouds gathering over this family. This odd and omniscient message was supposedly about a debt Patrizia owed, but the police believed it was her lawyer's way of informing her that the police were closing in. So, fearing that she would flee before they could arrest her, the police sprang into action and arrested everyone involved. All would remain in jail to await a trial that would take place 15 months later.
The chief, Mr. Nini, said to her, Mr. Reggiani, you know why we are here? And she said, I suppose for my husband. And he answered her, yes, but we are here to take you to the prison. We are here for you. And she said, good. But good that means I can do nothing to avoid this.
And when she came out, she had a big fur with all brilliant rings and similar. It was like she was going to the prima, to the first night at the Scala, not going to prison.
Throughout the entire ordeal, Pina Ariema, Patrizia's loyal friend and confidant, never said a word to anyone. That is until a few weeks before the trial started, when she confessed everything, breaking her almost 15-month silence after Patrizia Reggiani contacted her in jail and offered to shower her cell in gold if she took the blame for Maurizio Gucci's murder. This insulted Pina, because what fucking good is gold in prison? So naturally, she told the police everything they wanted to know. The trial started in early 1998, and Patrizia was the last to go on trial in June, with the press having already dubbed her the Black Widow. For Italy, this case was equivalent to the O.J. Simpson trial in the US, which I wasn't alive for, but I mean this in the sense that people sat down every day to watch it on their TVs. They stood in long lines trying to get into the courtrooms. People were obsessed because Gucci was everything to them. It was a part of their identity and life. Bad things didn't happen to the rich. Glamorous people don't get gunned down on their way to work. It was absolutely shocking for them. At the start of her trial, prosecutors had already done their part to show that Patrizia was an obsessed, hate-filled divorcee who coldly and determinedly orchestrated the murder of her ex-husband to gain control of his estates and money. And Patrizia's defense team tried to paint Pina Ariema as the true facilitator of the murder for hire. Patrizia's defense claimed she only found out about the murder plot a few days after Maurizio's passing, and that Pina Ariema had done it as a gift for Patrizia.
3 confessioni. La Reggiani Patrizia fu molto abile nel sostenere quella che secondo me poteva essere l'unica linea difensiva possibile, cioè lei diceva: è vero, io avevo più volte minacciato anche pubblicamente Maurizio, proprio per questo motivo queste persone hanno ucciso Maurizio e mi hanno ricattato.
Husband dead, and she spoke about it to everyone.
Sono stata ingenua fino al limite della stupidità. Mi sono trovata coinvolta, mio malgrado, ma mai complice. Questo lo nego ora e lo negherò sempre.
Allora, Pina ha commissionato questo delitto e sapendo che uccidendo Maurizio sarebbero finiti i miei problemi, invece me ne ha messi degli altri.
I difensori della Reggiani dissero che tutta l'organizzazione dell'omicidio era fatta dalla Pina Ariema e in realtà la Corte ha riconosciuto che questa versione era inverosimile. No, perché Pina diceva la verità e Patrizia diceva delle balle.
Yes, I know that people, the killer group, yes, I've paid them, but I didn't order to make the murder. They were asking me money, saying, hey, we have done what you always wished. We know that you wanted it and we have done it. Now you have to pay us. And she said, I gave them money because they were blackmailing me. They were saying, if you don't pay, something bad will happen to your daughter, to your family.
In their evidence, Oriema and two more of the accused, Savioni the hotel porter and Cicala the getaway driver, implicated Patrizia in every aspect of the murder, and there was independent evidence of her payments to the gang.
They claimed that to keep her silence, Pina threatened to pin the murder on Patrizia should she go to the police, which would have been an easy thing for her to do since Patrizia had been all over Milan telling everyone who would listen that she wanted to have her ex-husband killed. And Patrizia decided to not go to the police because she was afraid of the scandal it would cause. She figured that since Maurizio's death was something she had wanted for so many years, she felt this was a small price to pay for his death. No, yeah, she actually said that. It's absolutely ridiculous. She's so fucking stupid. No one actually believed her, though, except maybe her daughters, who stood by her side throughout the entire trial. Her daughters actually believed that it was her prior benign brain tumor that had turned her into a different person. They felt the tumor had altered her critical thinking skills. But I have a hard time believing that when Patrizia Reggiani was going around doing seances and trying to curse her ex-husband and getting into voodoo and trying to burn down his house. I just don't believe it. I'm sorry. With their daughter Allegra saying, I have no truth, but a certainty. My mother was a good woman, yet very vulnerable. And I'm sorry. I really feel for them, but your mother is the reason you don't have a father. Plain and simple. And yes, it's not like she pulled the trigger, but she is the chain of events for why he isn't alive today. And also, why would you want to be around a woman who's constantly going around town telling everybody that she wants to have your father murdered? Throughout the trial, Patrizia lied many times. Some believed her, but most people weren't buying it. Prosecutors surely weren't believing her. They painted her for who she was, a woman obsessed, who blamed Maurizio for her problems and had claimed he was an absent father. And honestly, it was her alone that was responsible for her own downfall, because she wrote in her diary everything. Every phone call, every meeting Maurizio had with their daughters. In court, prosecutors read an excerpt from her diary that read, July 18th, Mau calls and disappears. July 23rd, Mau calls. July 27th, Mau calls. September 10th, Mau shows up. September 11th, Mau calls, he meets the girls, we talk. September 12th, Mau goes to the movies. September 16th, Mau calls. September 17th, Mau meets the girls at school. Which just disproved another one of her lies, because by her own records, Maurizio was present in their lives and hadn't abandoned their daughters. Just her. Prosecutors even played her angry tape recordings that she had been sending to Maurizio. And then they read another excerpt from her diary, written just 10 days before the murder, which read, There is no crime which can't be bought. During the trial, it was revealed how the crime went down. Patrizia would feed Pina information about Maurizio's daily whereabouts. In turn, Pina would inform Orazio, who would then inform the hitman Benedetto. That way, no one could trace anything back to Patrizia. And it seems at first that this group didn't take her too seriously. They took her money and went on with their lives. But Patrizia grew impatient. By late March 1995, she told Pina to inform the group that the hit needed to happen soon, as Maurizio was planning a trip and she didn't know how long he would be gone for. She wanted it to be done before he left. She couldn't wait any longer, because a moment more with him alive was just too excruciating for her. She also knew that Maurizio had plans to sign a binding agreement with Paola that would cut her alimony in half, giving her only $860,000 a year, which she would later say amounted to a bowl of lentils. What a fucking piece of work. So on March 26, 1995, the day after Maurizio spoke with his daughter for the last time, Pina sent a message to Orazio saying, Il pacco è arrivato. The package has arrived. Prosecutors claimed this was their way of saying Maurizio was ready to be taken out. And it's difficult to argue the contrary, as the very next day, on March 27, 1995, Orazio picked up the hitman Benedetto and drove to Via Palestro, and the two men waited for Maurizio Gucci to show up. They waited about 45 minutes for Maurizio to show up, and then the hitman took off after him. It all happened so fast that Orazio, the driver, wasn't able to even fully turn the car around before the hitman was already running back towards him. Orazio didn't even see the hit happen, and then they took off. Orazio was home by 9 a.m., only 30 minutes after the murder had taken place. 2.5 years after Maurizio's murder, Patrizia and her 4 accomplices were found guilty. In 2004, Maurizio's daughters tried to campaign for a retrial, arguing Patrizia wasn't in command of her mental faculties. But in 2014, she would admit her involvement on television. When a TV reporter asked her outright, "Patrizia, why did you hire a hitman to kill Maurizio Gucci? Why didn't you shoot him yourself?" And Patrizia responded with, "My eyesight is not so good. I didn't want to miss." And she would even admit it to her daughters, telling them everything I did for you two. I'm not innocent, but I'm not guilty.
What they said about me is not true. Io non sono colpevole. Non dico di essere innocente, ma non sono colpevole.
After her sentencing, Gucci stores around the world displayed a gleaming pair of sterling silver handcuffs in their storefronts. A spokesperson for Gucci assured the public it was mere coincidence, but the whole situation really is upsetting. Maurizio Gucci was a person. He was a friend, a father, and his life was taken because of a greedy woman who felt like she was entitled to more. So now that we've discussed the entire case, I do want to go back a little bit and speak more on Gucci during 1995. In July 1995, Investcorp had appointed Domenico Desolé CEO of Gucci, and both him and Tom Ford would go on to create a bond that became a considerable asset to the company. Their partnership had clear boundaries. Tom Ford was in charge of collections and storefronts, while Desolé focused on Gucci's growth and prosperity. There was a very strong trust between the pair, so much so that many were quick to criticize Desolé for giving Tom Ford so much power. They feared that Desolé and Gucci would run the risk of Tom Ford overpowering the Gucci name and potentially holding the company hostage to any decisions he might make about staying or leaving. But Desolé wasn't concerned. He had long proved he could make Gucci successful. Sales had already jumped 87.1% in the year since Tom Ford had taken over.
So the sales went through the roof. In 1995, our sale doubled. The success was just unbelievable. Suddenly, really things looked up, and that at that point, Investcorp wanted to go public as fast as possible.
And by fall 1995, Investcorp had decided that the best thing to do would be to launch Gucci on the New York Stock Exchange and wash their hands of the company. And the world was abuzz. Everyone wanted to get their hands on a slice of Gucci. Demand was so high that the initial share price jumped from $22 to $26, despite not having been launched yet.
So the Gucci IPO was very anticipated, but what they realized was that there was no fashion sector in the financial market, so they actually had to train analysts in how the luxury market worked. And so Domenico is being given presentation workshops and skills. They are bringing analysts into the room and talking about how the industry works. They really pioneered the luxury sector in the financial market, and other brands, subsequently followed. But it was really the Gucci IPO that set the stage.
The old Gucci name sure is attracting a lot of customers these days on Main Street and Wall Street.
The IPO of Gucci was even more successful than their wildest dream.
The Gucci turnaround was so spectacular and unexpected. Suddenly, financial analysts were showing up to fashion shows and coining terms like fashion risk, which is the implication of what a weak collection might have on a business. These analysts began to understand the business cycle of fashion companies, including sourcing, delivery, and sell-through. They kept up with show reviews, fashion spreads, and Hollywood. Fashion was corporatizing. Everything was becoming about money and power. Artistry and risk had no place in fashion, especially if it was going to affect sales negatively. And while the fashion world adapted to these newfound pressures, Gucci was becoming the blueprint. Every collection was stronger, more daring, and shocking.
He brought back the logo and made it chic. He makes clothes that rock the world, and he puts sex back where it belongs. Here's Tom Ford for Gucci.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Vogue. Thank you. Thank you.
Gucci in 1995. Every fashion-smart woman in the world was saying it, wearing it, wanting it. The cause of all this excitement was a young American designer named Tom Ford. Last year, he created some of the most beautiful collections Gucci has ever produced. By marrying American verve with Italian craftsmanship, Tom forged an international style that put the Gucci label back in the forefront of chic. Tonight, the CFDA recognizes what a tremendous achievement this is as we present Tom and the House of Gucci with the 1995 International Award.
Thank you. Thanks.
Which only amped up Gucci's allure. In Tom Ford's March 1996 women's wear collection, Kate Moss walked out in a sleek, relaxed trouser, a satin blouse unbuttoned to her navel, and a long black wool coat with a satin lining. The collection was full of sleek black pieces, trousers, blouses, turtlenecks, jackets, and stirrups, as well as his iconic red velvet pantsuit that Gwyneth Paltrow would go on to wear, which would be revived too many times in my opinion. While Tom Ford's now infamous keyhole dresses closed the show, with their sexy and daring cutouts with flashy gold belts. They were actually inspired by Halston and Elsa Peretti, with Tom Ford calling the dresses the fashion equivalent of a one-night stand at Studio 54, which he would know because he did party at Studio 54.
This is what they talk about when they talk about fashion moments. It was incredible. The praise is like out the door. When you were standing back here and everybody was cheering, what did that feel like?
It was great. I'm not going to lie to you, it was great. When you work hard, you do what you think is right, but you never know. I mean, I was really nervous about this collection. I wasn't sure because it was a big change for us. I wasn't sure how people would react to it, and hopefully, well.
Let's talk a little bit about, all of a sudden the waistline's up here now, the belts are a little thicker, there are newer elements. Let's talk about what was new.
Fashion changes. Every season, you try to justify what you do, but the ultimate thing just has to be, does it look right? Does it look great for now? So, fashion changes. When something starts to lose its shock value, it starts to lose its fashion value, because then you don't feel new in it anymore, and you have to change it. You have to move it. So the hip hugger pant, as much as I love hip huggers, I'll always love hip huggers, looked great, but, it lost that shock value, so it had to move.
In his spring 1996 collection, he showed perforated sheer tops and lace paired with bright blue thongs. Kate Moss wore a black bandeau top and leather harness choker that walked against low-slung sheer blouses, zebra print sets, and corset tops with plunging necklines, followed by models walking out topless underneath leather jackets and pants. It was bold, sexy, and wild. Tom Ford had established himself at Gucci.
What are people's expectations?
High, because not only is Tom Ford a very creative designer, his clothes really sell.
I think it's unfair to have such high expectations of a designer. What must this be like for Tom Ford?
I should think Tom Ford must be feeling quite nervous at the idea when you're at the top, he's won so many prizes, had so many awards in 1996. He must be saying to himself, what can I do that's new that's going to wow them?
If it were me, I'd be quaking in my boots. How do you top yourself? It's pressure, but I think he can handle it.
And only a few months later, he would debut a menswear collection with models wearing iconic GG thongs and sheer monogram panties.
It's much like a tea bag, you see. There's a little pad up front, but in the back, you got nothing but a string, baby.
Women walked in semi-sheer black tops with strikingly bold shoulders and red heels. Some wore monogram velvet button-up blouses in red, black, burgundy, and blue, while carrying velvet monogram bags, and the popular red and black monogram boots made their way down the catwalk. The show closed with sets of bright-colored faux fur jackets in red, yellow, and blue.
I think we have the right image of who the Gucci man and Gucci woman are, where they're going, what their life is like. And so it's really just taking them into the next season. What do they want next? Where are they going? What are they doing? How's their life changed? How's it stayed the same? What do they need? So it was, I hope, an evolution from last season. That's what it was supposed to be.
I think that it is a very rational evolution from last season. You have to talk about Tom Ford and line. The man has such a definite line. He's very precise about defining a silhouette and making a silhouette clean and spare and very chic. Let me tell you one thing. When you have style, you can wear sable to church, a bikini, if you know how to pull it off. Why can't someone go in the middle of August in velvet and snakeskin boots? People who have confidence and individuality can wear anything, anytime they want. That is the girl at Gucci.
And by 1998, Tom Ford had debuted his most expensive pair of jeans, the Gucci Genius jeans, that sold for $4,000 and were hand-stitched by artisans and embossed with African beads and embroidered with giant flowers and feathers. And while you can argue that some of the collections may have lacked variety, the clothes made up for it in dimension and detail, because when worn, his clothes were striking. Take a boring black pencil skirt that had a hip-hugging G-string with Diamante GG sides. Tom Ford could do no wrong. and was quickly becoming a Hollywood insider. Knowing he had to make his mark to enact change, Tom Ford began hosting charity events. One event held at the Santa Monica airport was a private show, a dinner, and an all-night dance party in the hangar, which raised money for the AIDS Project in LA. In the 3 years since his takeover of Gucci, Tom Ford had without a doubt revamped Gucci's image, and it's because he controlled all aspects of it, from apparel to accessories, store concepts, advertising, office layouts, decor, staff attire, and floral arrangements. With each show, he locked himself to around 50 outfits, with the most important looks opening or closing the show. He even started blacking out his shows, except for a single spotlight on the catwalk, so that the audience was forced to focus on the clothing and not who was in the audience. And everything really seemed to be going right for Gucci, until it wasn't. By June 1998, Gucci had a new set of problems that they simply weren't prepared for. By this point, Prada had established themselves in the fashion industry. Miuccia Prada and Patrizio Bertelli, her husband, had transformed Prada from a luggage manufacturer into a global fashion powerhouse, and they very quickly became Gucci's biggest rival. Prada, much like Gucci, were demanding exclusive and strict contracts with their suppliers to ensure production capacity and to discourage fakes and copies. And Patrizio Bertelli, an explosive man, felt Gucci's encroachment and simply didn't like it. He dismissed Don Mello as arrogant and accused Tom Ford of copying their looks. And to be fair, by this point, everyone had been producing their own version of the nylon bag that had made Prada so popular. But for some reason, Bertelli focused his anger on Gucci. Patrizio Bertelli, who long admired LVMH, wanted to expand Prada's reach through acquisitions, so he decided the best thing to do was to invest in his biggest rival, who was now a publicly traded company. Prada would very soon announce that they had acquired a 9.5% stake in Gucci, and this move made Domenico Desolé uncomfortable, but not worried. Domenico Desolé is a brilliant man, and he knew it wasn't worth his time to focus his attention on Prada. He instead focused his attention on Japan, because around this time, in 1998, Domenico Desolé had visited Japan and had noticed people weren't shopping like they had been before. And he knew, before it even happened, that Japan's stock market was going to fall.
The risk was that somebody could take it over given this massive success. And it doesn't matter how successful you are with a public company. There are also always moments in which the stock may go down.
So he planned ahead, while most others didn't. Those who hadn't included Patrizio Bertelli, who watched as his new and very expensive investment into Gucci became worthless. But then, only a few months later, during the first week of January 1999, Domenico Desolé got some absolutely horrifying news. He had received a phone call from a trusted aide to Bernard Arnault of LVMH, who wanted to inform Domenico Desolé that LVMH had acquired more than 5% of Gucci's common stock, and planned on making an official statement that afternoon. The aide told Domenico Desolé that Bernard Arnault was so impressed by Gucci's success and accomplishments that he wanted to make a very passive acquisition into Gucci with purely friendly intent. And if you couldn't tell from the tone of my voice, there was nothing friendly nor passive about this. But I think I'm going to save this fight for part 4 because what's about to go down is truly insane, and it really needs its own space. This is the final battle that Gucci would endure, and I want to make sure that we have enough time to really discuss it. So I think it's good to end here. Part 4 is going to pick up right where we left off today. We're also going to talk about Frida, Alessandro, Sabato, and Demna, I guess? I don't know. I don't know how to feel about that man. Either way, there's still a lot to discuss. But I hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope you're enjoying the series as a whole. And as always, please let me know what you think in the comments. I appreciate everything. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day or night. And I cannot wait to see you all for the final part of my Gucci series. Bye!